Thanks for choosing to watch Quillbilly Garage. On this episode, we are going to continue the series 1934 Ford Sedan Resurrection. If you are watching this progress in real time, you'll know that it's been quite a few months since I've done any follow-up on this car. Other things have come along, other projects, other priorities, family vacations, things of that sort. But here we are getting back on it. One of the reasons that I haven't gotten any further since the last time I reported on this car is what I'd call paralysis by analysis. I get tripped up sometimes on basic decisions like what's the right next step? What's the right wheel bearing grease to use on these old style bearings? Things like that. So anyway, I've resolved some of those things, and I've got a little bit of time, and I've got a little bit of motivation, and one that, of course, I'd love to see this car back on the road, and two, I really do need to get it out of here, at least temporarily, so I can work on my 37 Cadillac, get a couple things fixed on that. So my goal here, hopefully in the next month or two, is to fire up this car and pull it out of this building under its own power with its own brakes working. And so just as a reminder where we left off with this, I had installed all new brake hydraulics, installed a proper master cylinder, mounted properly, not doing a full brake job, just replacing the hydraulics. As you can see, the brake shoes are the ones that were on it. I haven't changed any of that. And I know some might criticize me for not replacing everything since I'm in there, but I've got to make a decision and go with it here. And I decided that I'm not doing a full restoration. I'm just trying to get this back on the road, moving and stopping, rolling. I can always come back if I decide that I need to replace the shoes or hardware kit. I can always do that at some later date. Plus, I'm considering at some point switching over to the early Lincoln Bendix style brakes, in which case, why bother doing a full rebuild of these if I'm just going to swap them out? So what I did off camera is I filled up the master cylinder, and that's no easy task on these since it's right up under the floor. I had to get in there with a little cup and keep refilling the cup. But I then went out to the wheel cylinders and used this hand-actuated vacuum pump and pulled fluid through the system. So now we're going to lift the car up and take a look, see if we've got any leaks. Of course, nothing's under pressure. Anyway, let's get it up in the air here. All right. If this were a newer car, newer meaning, something where the master cylinder was mounted on the firewall, I would have just filled up the master cylinder and cracked open all the bleeders and let gravity do its thing. But that's not going to work on here because the master cylinder is basically below the level of all of the brake hydraulics. So that's why I had to go ahead and use the vacuum pump and suck the fluid through. So first we're looking at the master cylinder here, and it does look like there is possibly a little bit of fluid leakage there. I'll have to wipe that off and see if it continues. I don't know if that's just residual, maybe from when I was kind of blindly filling the master cylinder with a little cup full of fluid. Maybe I spilled some and didn't get it all the way off. But so that's the first place that I see a little bit of fluid leak. These fittings look okay. And if we Look up here, some more fittings. Those look dry. Get back here to the wheel cylinders. That looks dry there. That looks dry. Let's see, get up to the front here. So far, everything's looking dry. I looked up on the wheel cylinder side and didn't see any leakage there. Of course, again, I realize nothing's under pressure, but if I've got a leak when it's not under pressure, I know I got a problem. So that looks good. I'm going to lower the car down a level. I'm sorry, lower the car down a little bit and then talk about the next step. As we've talked about in previous videos, this car would have had mechanical brakes originally, and at some point, probably in the 50s or maybe early 60s, before my dad bought this car, somebody had converted it utilizing like 40 Ford brakes, and then they had kind of a goofy Mopar Dodge master cylinder mounted to the side of the frame that I've changed out. But these are the backing plates that had been put on so long ago. And one of the things that tripped me up was how to adjust them properly. Because instead of having 2 points of adjustment, it's got 4. And so over here on the bench, I had an extra 40 Ford backing plate with the brakes on it. So we're looking at the back side, and you've got 2 points here to adjust, and then points here to adjust. And as I understand it from watching countless videos on the internet, that these lower ones not only adjust the shoes out, but they adjust them up and down to help get them centered with the drum. And then the upper adjustments move the shoes just in and out. So I wasn't sure how to do this lower adjustment, but the decision I'm going with for now is that remembering that I am not taking the shoes off. These are the shoes that were installed back in the day, and I have not changed that lower adjustment. I'm just going to leave the lower adjustment alone, because as I understand it, if that stuff's all set right when the brakes were put on new, as the brakes wear, you just have to adjust out the upper adjustment point. So that's the decision I'm going with. I thought about it way too long. I'm going to just make the adjustments on the top and go with it. Handy having these spare parts here to take a look at and use for the video purposes. But again, these are the lower points. I believe if we pulled this off, we'd see a little concentric, so that when you're turning that screw from the back side, it would not only move the bottom of the shoe out, but also, in or out and up and down. Whereas the adjustments on the upper side, they turn this, can't see it with the shoe on there very well, but they turn these little deals here that just, move the shoe in and out for taking up the slack as the brakes wear. Of course, more modern cars, and when I say modern, I mean, probably from the 50s on up, maybe some 40s cars, would have an automatic self-adjuster in there. Well, these old brakes didn't have that, so that was a regular maintenance item on these. You drive them for so many miles and check all the fluids and grease things and adjust the brakes. So also another one of my trip up points was, well, what's the right kind of brake grease? I'll go more into that when we get to the rear brakes, but the front brakes have the same kind of tapered wheel bearing that you would see on, cars on up through the 60s, 70s, maybe 80s. So I'm just going to use some standard red wheel bearing grease. Go with that. What we're going to keep coming back to in this episode is not getting tripped up by decisions. So I've got the driver's side front bearings all cleaned up. And when I say cleaned up, I didn't run them through a solvent tank or squirt them down with brake clean. I wiped them really good and rotated and wiped them and rotated and wiped them. And when I pack them, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way my dad taught me, where you get a scoop of grease in your left hand and then slap the bearing into it with your right and push the old grease out with whatever is left in there until the new stuff comes through. And that's what I'm going to do. So, a point of interest, this is the inner bearing, and if you can read that, this is an original Ford bearing. See the Ford script, and then it's a part number B-1201. Then the outer bearing is a Hoover. I don't know that I've ever seen that brand before. Hoover part number 8-1218, it looks like. And then it's got an old National wheel seal, number 5796. And I was tempted to I'm going to, of course, reuse the bearings. I was tempted to reuse the seal. I'm sure I could get away with that. But it is an old rawhide seal, and it looks like, as I inspected it closer, it looked like maybe there was some places in there that weren't going to seal real well. So I haven't totally made the decision on that one yet, but I do have a couple of brand new seals. I'll probably use those. I wiped all the old grease out of the inside of the hub. Here's what the inner wheel bearing race looks like. And then on the outer race, I don't know if you can see it there. There's some, there are markings in there that I don't particularly like. I could swap it out, but I'm probably not gonna. I'm probably just gonna grease the bearings, put it back together, adjust the brakes, and get it on the road. Again, it's little things like that I could go back and forth on, and then another 6 months would go by and I wouldn't have made progress. I know there's different opinions on whether you sort of wash out the bearings with solvent and before re-greasing them, and I could go both ways. I'm not going to let it slow me down. I'm going to just pack them and put it together. So I'll get this one together and adjust the brake and get the other side. Also, I don't know that I will show that on camera unless there's something interesting to point out. Got the wheel bearings packed with grease. As you can see, I went ahead and used a new inner grease seal rather than trying to reuse the old rawhide seal that was in it. And I've got the outer wheel bearing greased, ready to go for when I slip the hub assembly onto the spindle. Well, it seems like there is no end to little decisions that come up that trip me up and slow me down. I was just about to slip the drum on, and I noticed, you can see the 4 bolts that hold the backing plate to the spindle. The bottom one, the bottom 2 I should say, the threaded end goes out the backside with the nuts, with the castle nuts inboard of the backing plate. But if you notice up top, the nuts are on the inside here and inside the little housing. Well, it's not that way on the passenger side, but here's the thing. Again, these are, since this car was originally mechanical brakes, these spindles are off a, I don't know, like a 37 to 41, something like that, Ford, so that they would accept the brakes. Well, the original 34 spindle has a steering arm on it to connect to the drag link. And the newer spindles don't have that. So there is this right here, this little steering arm that was made to bolt to the spindle and give something for the drag link to attach to. So that's why we've got threaded holes coming out inside the brake drum area. I poked around with a little pick, and there is nowhere, it doesn't appear to be a place to insert a cotter key, so we're just gonna go with it. It's been on there this long. It's probably gonna be just fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and proceed and put the drum on. I've got the driver's side front drum hub assembly back on with the freshly greased wheel bearings and the new grease seal. One thing I'll point out that I didn't mention earlier, I found it interesting that the dust cap, rather than being a friction fit, one that you would tap on with a hammer and then pry back off, that it's actually threaded. So I tightened the front bearings just like I would any more modern car. And again, by modern, we're talking 60s, 70s, 80s. Where I tightened up the wheel bearing and then backed off and put the cotter key in the nearest available slot in the castle nut that lined up with the hole in the end of the spindle. Now that's going to be a different story on the rear hubs as far as the tightening procedure. So we'll get a little more into that when we get to the back of the car. So my next step is to put the wheel on so I have a little more leverage when I spin the drum and adjust the brakes. As you can see, I've already got a wrench hanging here. From what I've learned on the internet, you do the forward shoe first. I'll adjust that out till it's just barely touching the drum. I'll back it off a little, and then I'll adjust the rear shoe. Something else, another point of interest, this car has the original spoked wheels, and as we talked about, this not having the original hubs and drums because it's been converted to hydraulic, these drums are not designed, they're not built to properly support a wire wheel. Now that's what was on it, and that's how my dad drove it back in the 60s. But now we're going to put it back together properly. I bought these wire wheel supports. They'll go over there, and I think it's this lip here that provides the appropriate support on the wire wheel. So we'll get that on and adjust the brakes and go from there. I've been working now on the passenger side front bearings and wanted to do a quick check in here and point out that just like on the driver's side, the inner wheel bearing is a Ford script bearing. Part number, and I can't read that first digit, and I don't remember what I said for the other side. It's either an 8 or a B, I think. So -1201. You may recall on the driver's side that the outer bearing was a Hoover brand. On the passenger side, we've got a Bauer bearing, 08074, and the wheel seal was the same, a National 5796, an old original rawhide bearing. Here's the dust cap close look. I mentioned that it's threaded instead of being a pressed fit or a friction fit. These bearings and races all looked good, so I'm going to go ahead and grease them and get this back on and adjust the brakes on the passenger side. Got both front wheels back on and the brakes adjusted. I did have new lug nuts that I bought for the car and used those. You may recall from one of my first videos about this car that my dad bought these tires brand new. Actually, my mom bought them as a gift for my dad. So these tires, which are still basically new tread-wise, they were probably purchased in about 1975. Again, I talked about this several videos ago, but that dirtiness at the bottom of the tire, that's where, when this car was parked at my grandparents' house for many, many years, where it sank into the sand. So the tire for the passenger side front would not hold air, so I pulled this wheel. It's a set of wheels that I have for my 33 Ford, but this was the spare, and I thought, well, for now I'll use it on here so I can keep this car up off the ground. You'll notice this one's actually they're 17-inch wheels. This one's actually a Kelsey Hayes bent spoke wheel, whereas, let's go back to the other side, these are a factory Ford wheel that has straight spokes. Another couple points of interest here. As I was putting the wheel on, I noticed that it helps to have an extension. See how it tapers out before the socket goes on. So it's a thinner diameter than most extensions. Here's an example of what you typically see. Anyway, the reason this was more helpful, I think it's obvious here, is that the other extension was rubbing on the wheel. Another little unrelated to the car, but point of interest. Back when I was just got out of college and was married and we were living in the college town, I acquired cars while I was there. And then when it came time to move, I think we probably had 4 vehicles there. And so I was quickly trying to get rid of a couple. And one of them, I couldn't sell it, but I traded it to a guy for some tools. And one of the tools was this 1/2-inch drive ratchet. With that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. Next episode in this series, we'll start fresh, putting the back brakes back together, greasing the rear wheel bearings. They're a little bit different deal, a different style bearing, different kind of grease that I'm going to use, and there's a different procedure for tightening up that axle nut. So thanks again for watching. I hope you're enjoying what you're seeing. If you're just now joining us for this series, I recommend that you go back and watch the first several episodes, even going back to before I was giving them episode numbers. The very first one was when we got this started up after it's sitting for so many years. So thanks again for watching. If you're enjoying what you're seeing, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and hit the like button on the episode. Thank you.